The sound of Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's condescending laughter echoed through the packed arena, followed by a stunned, deafening silence from the thousands in attendance. On the giant screens, her voice, dripping with disdain, was unmistakable. President Trump stood at the podium, his expression unreadable. As he let the recording play out, his gaze fixed on the camera and through it, on the nation itself. The day began with a media blitz. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her face a mask of passionate sincerity, was everywhere. From the plush armchair of a morning news show, she unveiled her masterpiece, the American Renewal Fund. It was, she declared, the most significant anti-poverty legislation in a generation. A bold, sweeping plan to rebuild the nation's soul by taxing the super wealthy and large corporations to fund social programs for the struggling masses. The president, she said, leaning into the camera, her voice resonating with rehearsed conviction, wants you to believe that protecting billionaires will somehow help your family. It's a tired, old lie. My plan, the American Renewal Fund, isn't about protecting the powerful. It's about empowering you. It's about fighting for the little guy. Her social media was a relentless storm of attacks. Post after post painted President Donald Trump as a heartless oligarch, a puppet of Wall Street, completely deaf to the cries of the common person. Her supporters hailed her as a modern-day Joan of Arc, a fearless warrior for the people. To them, she was the future, and Trump was the past. By midday, the narrative had solidified across the mainstream media. AOC was the champion of the working class. Trump was the villain, holed up in the White House, plotting new ways to help his rich friends. But inside the Oval Office, the atmosphere wasn't one of panic. It was one of quiet, calculated focus. President Trump sat behind the resolute desk, not watching the news, but listening intently to a man who had risked everything to be there. The man was a mid-level Democratic aide, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a simple, unmarked USB drive. He was not a political operative, but an accountant, a man who had joined the party believing he could do some good. Mr. President, the aide began, his voice barely a whisper. I believe in helping people. I truly do. But this isn't that. He pushed the drive across the desk. My father owns a small manufacturing business in Ohio. He has 32 employees. They're like family to us. This bill, this renewal fund, it would destroy them. It would destroy everything my grandfather built. It's not about renewal, sir. It's about punishment. The aide slid a folded piece of paper next to the drive. It was a handwritten letter. I was at a fundraiser last night, the aide continued, his eyes welling up, in a penthouse in Manhattan. I recorded it. You need to hear it. The American people need to hear it. They need to know who they're really dealing with. President Trump picked up the letter. It was from the aide's father, a simple, heartbreaking plea written on company letterhead, detailing how the new taxes would force him to fire his loyal employees and sell the company his own father had started after coming home from the war. It was a piece of raw, human truth in a city built on spin. Trump looked from the letter to the USB drive. He nodded slowly, his expression grim. You did the right thing, he said, his voice low and steady. You're a patriot. As the aide left, a sense of grim purpose settled over the room. The trap had been set by his opponent, but the key to dismantling it now lay on the president's desk. That evening, the energy in the arena was electric. Thousands of people, a sea of red, white, and blue, had gathered for a primetime rally. They were farmers, small business owners, construction workers, and police officers, the very people AOC claimed to be fighting for, and the very people Trump had sworn to protect. The president walked onto the stage to a deafening roar. He smiled, waved, and let the applause wash over him. When he finally stepped to the podium, he didn't open with an attack. He began with a story. "I had a visitor at the White House today," he said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "A good man, a young man who works in Washington, who got into politics because he wanted to make a difference." He held up a piece of paper. "He gave me this. It's a letter from his father. His father runs a small business in Ohio, not a big fancy corporation, a small business. He has 32 employees. And this letter is about how a new bill being pushed in Congress, a bill they call the American Renewal Fund, is going to force him to fire every single one of those people." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. This was real. This was a story they all understood. It was the fear that kept them up at night. "This father doesn't want a government handout," Trump continued, his voice rising with controlled passion. "He just wants the government to get out of the way so he can provide for his family and the families of his employees. But according to some people in Washington, that's not enough." The audience was now hanging on his every word. The air crackled with tension. "The Congresswoman who wrote this bill says it's all about helping the little guy," Trump said, his tone shifting. "She says she's fighting for you. But I have to wonder, what does she really think about you? What does she say when she's not on TV? What does she say when she's behind closed doors, in a fancy penthouse in Manhattan, surrounded by the same globalist billionaires she claims to despise?" A gasp went through the crowd. They could sense what was coming. "I think," Trump said, leaning into the microphone, "it's time we all found out." He gave a signal. The giant screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing his face, flickered to black. And then there was sound. The clinking of champagne glasses. The murmur of a wealthy crowd. And then a woman's voice, sharp and clear, followed by a peal of laughter. It was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. "Honestly, the numbers are fantastic." Her voice sneered through the speakers. "The polling shows they're buying it completely. The whole annual branding is genius." A man's voice, deep and sycophantic, replied, "But Alexandria, the taxes. How do you sell such a massive hike to the middle class?" Then came the moment that would shatter her career. AOC's laugh, dripping with arrogance and contempt, echoed through the arena. "You don't sell it to them," she said, her voice laced with mockery. "You tell them it's for their own good. They're so unevolved. They just don't understand the greater good we're creating. They're worried about their little paychecks, their little businesses. It's our job to think for them." A wave of shock, so profound it was physically palpable, rolled through the audience. It was a collective intake of breath, a sudden, horrifying realization. Jaws dropped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. A man in a Union t-shirt just shook his head, his face a mask of betrayal. The laughter on the recording felt like a physical blow. When the recording ended, a deafening silence fell. It was the silence of a people who had just heard their deepest fears confirmed. They had been called stupid. They had been called backward. They had been mocked by the very person claiming to be their savior. Into that silence, President Trump spoke. His voice was not triumphant. It was cold, hard, and precise. "Unevolved," he repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "That's what she thinks of you. The men and women who build this country, who fight our wars, who raise our families. She thinks you need her to think for you." He held up the father's letter again. This man isn't unevolved. He's an American. And he deserves a government that respects him, not one that laughs at him behind his back. The shock in the crowd was turning to a slow-burning rage. The silence was replaced by a low growl of anger. So today, President Trump declared, his voice booming with authority, I am signing an executive order, the Small Business Protection Act. It will use every tool at my disposal to shield America's family-owned businesses from these predatory, job-killing taxes. The arena erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a roar of relief, of gratitude, of vindication. The anger had found its release. President Trump let them cheer, then raised a hand for silence. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes blazing with intensity, speaking not just to the arena, but to the entire nation, and directly to his defeated opponent. She wanted to take from your kitchen table to decorate hers, he said, his voice dropping to a powerful, steely tone. We heard you, Congresswoman, even when you thought the little people weren't listening. He paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in, before delivering the final, devastating blow. In this country, the greater good is letting you keep what you earned. The crowd exploded in a thunderous, sustained ovation that felt like it could shake the very foundations of the city. They weren't just cheering for a policy. They were cheering for a president who had not only listened to them, but had also given them a voice, and in one stunning, unforgettable moment, had exposed the breathtaking arrogance of those who sought to rule them. What do you believe was the most powerful weapon in this story? The father's emotional letter, the shocking secret recording, or the president's final, cutting words? Let us know your thoughts. And for more stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe to the channel.